What if the real reason you feel tired after eating, crave sugar late at night, wake up exhausted, and keep gaining stubborn belly fat, has almost nothing to do with age? What if your blood sugar has been unstable for years, and nobody ever taught you how to recognize the signs? Because most people think blood sugar only matters if you have diabetes, but long before a diagnosis ever appears, the body starts whispering through cravings, through brain fog, through afternoon crashes, through irritability, through that strange feeling of being hungry again, even after eating. And the scary part, some of the foods causing the biggest damage are marketed as healthy. But today you're going to discover 7 powerful foods that can naturally help lower blood sugar, reduce spikes, improve insulin sensitivity, and help your body feel stable again, without relying only on medication. And one of these foods works so well that researchers started comparing its effects to certain blood sugar drugs. Another one has been used for centuries in ancient cultures, yet most people today completely ignore it. And wait until you see the final food on this list, because it's probably already sitting somewhere in your kitchen right now. But before we begin, if you enjoy videos that combine real science, ancient wisdom, and practical health advice without all the nonsense, subscribe to the channel, because your body has probably been asking for help for much longer than you realize. And now, let's start with one of the most underestimated foods in your entire kitchen. Number 1. Cinnamon. The spice that talks to insulin. Most people see cinnamon as decoration, something sprinkled on coffee, added to desserts, just a flavor. But your body may see it very differently. Because hidden inside this simple spice are powerful plant compounds called polyphenols, natural substances researchers have linked to improved insulin sensitivity and healthier blood sugar regulation. And that matters more than most people realize. When blood sugar rises too quickly, the body responds by releasing insulin like an emergency signal. Over time, if this happens constantly, cells begin responding less efficiently. That's when energy crashes start showing up. Cravings become stronger, fat storage increases, and the body slowly begins feeling metabolically exhausted. Cinnamon appears to help soften that process. Some studies suggest it may slow how quickly sugar enters the bloodstream after meals. Others indicate it may help cells respond more effectively to insulin itself. In simple terms, your body doesn't have to panic as much after eating. And what makes this even more interesting is that cultures around the world were using cinnamon medicinally centuries before scientists understood blood glucose. In Ayurvedic traditions, cinnamon was valued as a warming spice connected to digestion and balanced energy. In parts of Asia and the Middle East, it was often consumed after carbohydrate-heavy meals long before anyone spoke about insulin or glycemic response. Sometimes ancient traditions notice patterns long before science explains them. Now, this doesn't mean cinnamon is magic. Adding cinnamon to ultra-processed sugary foods will not suddenly transform your metabolism. But used consistently in a balanced lifestyle, it can become one of those quiet daily habits that gently supports the body instead of overwhelming it. And the practical side is surprisingly simple. You can stir cinnamon into oatmeal in the morning, mix it into yogurt, add it to coffee, smoothies, herbal teas, or even warm water after meals. Many people enjoy using it in overnight oats or protein bowls because it adds flavor while supporting steadier energy throughout the day. And quality matters. Many experts prefer Ceylon cinnamon because it contains lower levels of coumarin, a compound that may become problematic in excessive amounts over time. But here's something most people never connect. Stable blood sugar doesn't only influence diabetes risk. It affects mood, focus, skin aging, sleep, energy, even hunger itself. Because when glucose spikes happen all day long, the nervous system never fully relaxes. That's why so many people feel out of control around food. Their biology is constantly being pushed into survival mode. And sometimes healing doesn't begin with something dramatic. Sometimes it begins when people finally start respecting the simple things again. But if you think cinnamon is impressive, wait until you see what the next food does once it enters your stomach. Number 2. Chia seeds, the tiny seeds that slow everything down. At first glance, chia seeds don't look powerful. They're tiny, almost flavorless, easy to underestimate. But the moment they touch water, something fascinating happens. They expand into a thick gel-like texture, and that simple transformation changes the entire speed of digestion inside the body. And when it comes to blood sugar, speed changes everything. One of the biggest problems in modern eating is that food moves too fast. Highly processed meals are digested rapidly. Glucose floods the bloodstream. Insulin spikes aggressively. Then energy crashes just as fast. That's why so many people feel hungry again shortly after eating. Not because they lack discipline, because their blood sugar went on a roller coaster. Chia seeds help slow that roller coaster down. They're rich in soluble fiber, which forms a gel during digestion and helps delay how quickly carbohydrates are absorbed into the bloodstream. In simpler terms, less chaos, less spiking, less crashing, and that slow, steady release of energy can completely change how the body feels during the day. What's remarkable is that ancient civilizations already understood the sustaining power of chia long before modern nutrition science existed. The Aztecs reportedly used chia as endurance fuel for warriors and messengers traveling long distances. Not because it created explosive energy, but because it helped maintain stable energy over time. That's a completely different kind of fuel. And modern science now supports what those traditions seem to understand intuitively. Fiber-rich foods like chia may help improve satiety, reduce overeating, and support healthier glucose regulation. But here's the deeper layer most people miss. Blood sugar instability doesn't only affect the body, it affects emotions, behavior, focus, cravings. When glucose crashes, the brain interprets it as danger. That's when impulsive eating increases, mood swings appear, cravings intensify, and people start believing they simply don't have enough willpower. Sometimes the issue isn't discipline at all. Sometimes the body simply never feels stable enough to relax. And foods like chia help create that stability. One of the easiest ways to use chia seeds is by soaking them in water before eating them. Once softened, they can be added to yogurt, smoothies, oatmeal, overnight oats, low-sugar puddings, or protein bowls. Some people even drink chia water before meals to help reduce hunger spikes later in the day. And because chia also contains omega-3 fatty acids, it may help support inflammation control too, which matters because chronic inflammation and insulin resistance are deeply connected. Your metabolism is not isolated. The gut talks to the brain talks to hormones. Hormones influence cravings, and cravings shape behavior. That's why stabilizing blood sugar often changes much more than people expect. Clearer thinking, more stable moods, less obsession with food, fewer cravings late at night. Because the calmer your blood sugar becomes, the quieter the internal noise becomes too. And the next food on this list has been quietly helping people regulate blood sugar for centuries, long before science fully understood why it worked. Number 3. Apple cider vinegar. The ancient trick. Modern science rediscovered few foods sound less impressive than vinegar. It's sharp, acidic, strong-smelling, and for many people, it feels more like a cleaning product than a health food. But inside that sour liquid is something surprisingly powerful. Because apple cider vinegar appears to influence blood sugar in one of the most important moments of the entire metabolic process, right after eating. And that's where many problems begin. For most people, blood sugar spikes are not happening once in a while. They're happening all day long. Breakfast spikes it, snacks spike it, sugary drinks spike it. Even many healthy processed foods spike it. And every time that happens, the body has to rush insulin into the bloodstream to pull glucose back down. Over time, that constant cycle becomes exhausting. But studies suggest apple cider vinegar may help reduce the intensity of those spikes, especially when consumed before carbohydrate-rich meals. One reason appears to be its acetic acid content, which may slow stomach emptying and reduce how quickly glucose enters the bloodstream. In simpler terms, food moves slower, sugar rises slower. The body stays calmer. And what's fascinating is that vinegar-based tonics have existed for centuries across many cultures. Ancient civilizations used fermented foods constantly, often without fully understanding why they made people feel better after meals. In parts of Europe, diluted vinegar drinks were traditionally consumed before heavy meals. In folk medicine traditions, fermented foods were associated with digestion and vitality long before laboratories existed. Now, modern science is beginning to uncover why. The body responds differently when digestion slows down slightly. Insulin doesn't have to overreact, energy becomes steadier, and cravings later in the day often decrease, because one blood sugar spike rarely stays isolated. It creates another craving, another crash, another cycle. That's why so many people feel trapped in constant hunger. Their biology keeps chasing stability. And one of the simplest practical habits is incredibly easy. Some people dilute 1 or 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar into a large glass of water before meals. Others use it as a salad dressing mixed with olive oil and herbs. It can also be added to vegetable dishes or savory meals to reduce the overall glycemic impact of a meal. But balance matters. More is not better. Apple cider vinegar is highly acidic, so drinking large amounts straight can irritate the throat and damage tooth enamel over time. Small, consistent use tends to be the smarter approach. And here's something else most people overlook. Healthy metabolism is not only about what you eat, it's also about how fast your body processes what you eat. Modern life pushes speed into everything: fast food, fast eating, fast digestion, fast crashes. But the body often heals through slowing down. And the next food on this list completely changes the way most people think about carbohydrates themselves. Number 4. Lentils. The carb that behaves nothing like sugar. For years, people have been taught to fear carbohydrates. Bread became the enemy. Rice became suspicious. Beans and legumes were suddenly treated like mistakes. And somewhere along the way, many people started believing that all carbs affect the body the same way. But lentils completely destroy that idea, because unlike highly processed carbohydrates that flood the bloodstream with glucose, lentils behave very differently inside the body, slowly, steadily, almost patiently, and that changes everything. Lentils are packed with fiber, plant protein, minerals, and complex carbohydrates that digest much more gradually than refined foods, which means instead of creating a massive glucose spike followed by a crash, they help create a more stable and sustained release of energy. That's one reason researchers often classify lentils as a low glycemic food, and the difference becomes visible, not only in blood sugar levels, but in how people feel afterward. More stable energy, longer fullness, fewer cravings, less urgency around food, because the body is no longer being thrown into metabolic chaos every few hours. And what makes lentils especially fascinating is that some of the healthiest and longest living populations in the world have relied on legumes for generations. In several blue zone regions, where people frequently live into their 90s and beyond, lentils and beans are foundational foods, not luxury foods, not trendy supplements, daily foods. Simple meals repeated consistently over decades. Modern nutrition often chases intensity, but the body usually responds better to stability, and lentils support that stability in multiple ways. The fiber helps slow digestion. The protein helps increase satiety. The magnesium supports metabolic function. And the resistant starch inside lentils may even help nourish beneficial gut bacteria, which researchers now believe play a major role in insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation. Your metabolism is not just happening in your bloodstream, it's happening in your gut too. That's why many people notice improvements in digestion, energy, and hunger control when they begin replacing ultra-processed carbohydrates with foods like lentils. And the practical side is easier than most people expect. Lentils can be added to soups, curries, salads, bowls, or simple rice dishes. They work well as a replacement for refined starches because they create fullness without the sharp glucose swings that often come from heavily processed foods. Some people even use lentils to reduce how much white rice or pasta they eat, without feeling deprived. And that's important, because sustainable health rarely comes from punishment. It comes from helping the body feel nourished enough to stop fighting for survival. And maybe the most powerful lesson lentils teach is this: not all carbs create damage. Some actually help restore balance. But now we're moving into something far more surprising, because the next food on this list contains compounds so unusual that scientists started comparing them to insulin itself. Number 5, bitter melon, the fruit that mimics insulin. If you saw bitter melon for the first time, you might never guess it could influence blood sugar so powerfully. It doesn't look comforting. It doesn't taste comforting either. In fact, most people dislike it immediately. And maybe that's part of the lesson, because modern culture has trained people to expect healing to taste sweet. But the body often grows stronger through balance, not constant pleasure. Bitter melon has been used for centuries in traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic practices, and many Southeast Asian cultures as a natural support for blood sugar regulation. Long before glucose monitors existed, people noticed something important. Those who consumed bitter melon regularly often experienced more stable energy and fewer symptoms associated with sugar imbalance. Now science is beginning to understand why. Bitter melon contains several bioactive compounds that researchers believe may help the body process glucose more effectively. Some studies suggest certain compounds inside the fruit may support glucose uptake into cells and improve insulin sensitivity. Others have explored its potential role in supporting pancreatic function and helping reduce post-meal blood sugar spikes. And this is where things become fascinating. Some scientists became so intrigued by bitter melon's effects that comparisons started appearing between its mechanisms and certain diabetes medications. Not because it replaces medication, but because nature sometimes influences the same biological pathways modern medicine targets. That's an important distinction. Food is not magic, but food is information. Every meal sends signals into the body, signals of inflammation or repair, signals of overload or balance, signals of stress or stability. And bitter melon seems to send a very unique signal, one that says, slow down, regulate, stabilize. But here's the challenge. Its bitterness can be intense at first. And ironically, that bitterness may be part of why it works. Bitter compounds appear to interact with digestion, hormones, and metabolic signaling in ways researchers are still exploring today. In many traditional cultures, bitterness was never removed from the diet the way it often is in modern processed food systems. Today, most industrial foods are engineered for maximum pleasure, sweet, salty, hyper-palatable. But the body evolved with a much wider spectrum of flavors, and bitterness may play a role modern diets have almost completely erased. Practically, bitter melon is often consumed sautéed, added to stir-fries, brewed into teas, or taken as a supplement. In some cultures, it's mixed with garlic, onion, or savory spices to soften the intensity of its flavor. And no, most people don't fall in love with it immediately, but sometimes the foods that challenge the palate are the same foods that help restore balance inside the body. Because healing isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's simply consistent. And the next food on this list may be the closest thing nature has to a metabolic reset button. Hidden inside one of the youngest forms of a vegetable almost everyone already knows. Number 6. Broccoli sprouts. The food that activates your internal defense system. Most people think broccoli sprouts are just baby broccoli, small, fragile, probably healthy, but nothing special. But inside these tiny sprouts is one of the most studied natural compounds in modern nutrition science, sulforaphane. And researchers became interested in sulforaphane for one major reason. It appears to activate some of the body's own internal defense and repair systems, not by forcing the body harder, but by helping it function more intelligently. And that matters because blood sugar problems are not only about sugar, they're also about inflammation, oxidative stress, cellular damage, and insulin resistance slowly building over time. This is where broccoli sprouts become so fascinating. Some research suggests sulforaphane may help reduce oxidative stress and improve insulin sensitivity, particularly in people struggling with metabolic dysfunction. In simpler terms, it may help the body respond to glucose more efficiently while also reducing some of the internal stress associated with chronically elevated blood sugar. And what makes broccoli sprouts especially powerful is concentration. Young broccoli sprouts can contain dramatically higher levels of sulforaphane precursors compared to mature broccoli, which means something tiny can sometimes carry an enormous biological impact. Nature does that often. The smallest things quietly control the biggest systems. And here's something even deeper. Many people think metabolism is only about calories, but metabolism is communication. Your cells are constantly interpreting signals from food, sleep, stress, movement, and inflammation. When the body lives in chronic inflammatory stress, insulin signaling becomes less efficient. Energy production changes, fat storage increases, and the body begins protecting itself instead of functioning optimally. That's why blood sugar instability often appears alongside fatigue, brain fog, stubborn weight gain, and constant cravings. Everything is connected, and broccoli sprouts appear to support the body at a deeper cellular level instead of simply masking symptoms temporarily. In practical terms, they're surprisingly easy to use. People often add broccoli sprouts to salads, sandwiches, wraps, grain bowls, smoothies, or eggs. Some even grow them at home because sprouts can be cultivated in small spaces with very little equipment. And freshness matters. The active compounds are strongest when the sprouts are fresh and minimally processed. But maybe the most powerful lesson from broccoli sprouts is this. The body is constantly trying to heal itself. Every second, every hour, every day, even after years of stress, even after years of poor habits, even after years of imbalance. Your biology is not your enemy. It's trying to adapt and survive based on the signals it receives, and sometimes changing those signals begins with something incredibly small. But now we arrive at the final food on this list. And ironically, it may be the most powerful one of all, precisely because it looks so ordinary. Number 7. Beans. The humble food that quietly protects millions. It's almost disappointing, isn't it? After hearing about exotic fruits, ancient remedies, and powerful plant compounds, the final food on this list turns out to be beans, not expensive powders, not rare supplements, not some futuristic metabolic hack, just beans. And maybe that's exactly why modern culture overlooks them, because people have been conditioned to believe that real healing must be complicated, expensive, extreme. But some of the healthiest populations in the world built their diets around foods that looked incredibly ordinary, and beans are one of the greatest examples of that. Because inside this humble food is a combination the modern body desperately needs: fiber, plant protein, slow-digesting carbohydrates, minerals, and resistant starch. And together they create something powerful, Stability. Unlike ultra-processed foods that rapidly flood the bloodstream with glucose, beans digest slowly and steadily. That slower digestion helps reduce sharp blood sugar spikes while also keeping people full for much longer. And fullness matters more than most people realize. Because when the body feels nourished, cravings begin to calm down naturally. That's one reason studies consistently associate legumes with better blood sugar control, improved insulin sensitivity, healthier weight regulation, and even longevity. But the deeper story may be happening in the gut. Beans contain resistant starch and fermentable fibers that help feed beneficial gut bacteria. And researchers now understand that the microbiome plays a massive role in inflammation, insulin signaling, appetite regulation, and metabolic health. In other words, your blood sugar is not controlled by one organ alone. It's an entire ecosystem. And beans help support that ecosystem, which is fascinating because for generations, many traditional cultures instinctively treated beans as a foundational food. In Mediterranean regions, Latin American traditions, Blue Zone communities, and many rural populations around the world, beans were never considered health food. They were simply food, daily food, reliable food, sustaining food. Then modern processed diets arrived. Fiber disappeared, meals became faster, sugar became constant, and metabolic disease exploded everywhere. Sometimes progress forgets wisdom. And maybe that's why so many people today feel trapped in cycles of hunger, fatigue, and cravings. Their bodies are overloaded with stimulation, but starving for nourishment. Practically, beans are incredibly versatile. Black beans, lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans, white beans, and many other varieties can be added to soups, bowls, salads, stews, or simple home-cooked meals. Pairing beans with vegetables, healthy fats, and balanced proteins often creates meals that keep blood sugar dramatically more stable than ultra-processed alternatives. And no, this isn't about perfection. You do not need to eat flawlessly. You do not need to fear every carbohydrate. You do not need to obsess over every meal. The body responds most powerfully to consistency. Small choices repeated daily, meals that create stability instead of chaos. Foods that nourish instead of overstimulate. And maybe the most important realization is this. Your body was never asking for something extreme. It was asking for support. Because long before disease appears, the body whispers through fatigue, through cravings, through brain fog, through inflammation, through unstable energy. But most people ignore the whispers until the body finally has to scream. And that's why these foods matter. Not because they are trendy, not because they are magical, but because they help restore something modern life constantly disrupts: metabolic balance. So if one food on this list surprised you, comment below which one it was. And I also want to know, which of these foods do you already eat regularly? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because this channel is all about practical health wisdom that actually helps real people feel better again. And remember, sometimes transformation doesn't begin by removing something from your life. Sometimes it begins when you finally give your body what it has been asking for all along.